Stop the Week with Robert Robinson.
Hello. Our conversation this evening comes from Anne Leslie, the journalist, Laurie Taylor, Professor of Sociology at York University, Michael O'Donnell, doctor, physician, writer, Nicholas Tucker, lecturer in psychology at Sussex University. We have music from Instant Sunshine. Well, everything's going down like nine pins, the old absolutes, the shibboleths, the certainties. It seems they've all been climbing the wrong mountain. Everest isn't the highest. They've had the tape measures out, and it seems it should have been Box Hill all along. And then here we have Queen Victoria turning out to be no prude after all, not exactly swapping limericks with Tennyson, but certainly letting her hubby put her stockings on. And all this has to be added to other recent bouleverses, King John not being a weak king, actually his gay old brother Richard, who was that, despite the PR put out about the Crusades at the time, and we've long known Richard III was really a care worker. All this received wisdom, toppling off the pedestal of certainty. What cherished absolute could you all least, or perhaps each least, do without?
I think that the nearest that I came to feeling suddenly that the world was moving around from underneath me was when I read a thing which said that if you looked at the size of England and the size of Britain, then it was quite clear that Yorkshire was in the Midlands. Now, they cannot possibly have that because life swings around completely, if that is true.
Yes, but you see, I don't think there's such a thing as a cherished absolute crumbling away, because I will continue, despite the evidence, to believe that Yorkshire is in the far north. I will continue to believe that Everest is the highest mountain in the world. And indeed, Sir Edmund Hillary, apparently, was asked about his opinion, having only climbed the second highest. And he said, well, the new method of measuring, which has proved that Everest is shorter than everybody thought, could perhaps be reapplied. And he said he still believed that Everest was the tallest. So really,
it's
nobody...
going from inches to centigrade.
Yes, but nobody actually will ever give up these certainties. I mean, who's going to? I don't give up certainties. I mean, for example, I always was told as a child you should never leave plants in a sick room because they used up all the oxygen.
That's right.
And you had this idea that if you
they breathe out the carbon dioxide.
Yes, and it was like a combination of sort of sitting in the boot of the car with the exhaust filling the windows up. Anyway, I still, if somebody is sick, rush in and remove all the plants.
But and it's only at night, I hope. I push them in during the day.
Yes,
I
exactly.
agree
it's
with
at
you.
night. Yes. Oh, you agree with me, Doctor?
Yes. I'm one with you. I mean, I actually believe in the existence of trains on the Bakerloo line, despite all the evidence. Like you.
And Mornington Crescent.
But I wouldn't be deprived of one thing, though. The thing that I would lose with the most pain would be the image I have of that benign, rather ascetic old man sitting under a tree and an apple falling on his head, and him saying, "Goodness gracious me, apples fall downwards. Methinks I've discovered the law of gravity."
Yeah, but no one said that didn't happen.
No, but I hope they never will, because it's
I
like...
I said that tremulously because I just don't want to hear that kind of thing.
Nor do I, because Stevenson gazing at the kettle boiling and seeing a steam engine...
Mother, I burnt the cakes, he said.
This is the knowledge of science that our governors and our mandarins have. They have this picture of science, and I don't want it taken away from them.
Well, my problem is that I think I've lost all my ingrained beliefs. I'm trying to think of something I actually believe in. I mean, I know now that the Swedes don't have the highest suicide rate. I know there's very little iron in spinach. And then,
what?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Why does it taste bitter?
Because it just doesn't taste very nice. That was always confused with iron.
Just go easy.
No, this is true, Bob. It's something to do with the decimal point put in the wrong place.
You mean fish doesn't improve the brain?
No, that I'm not so sure about. But I had to really thrash around to think of a belief that would really shake me if it went.
Carrots make you see in the dark.
Could Galileo be wrong? And I thought, well, if he was, it wouldn't make any difference to me, really. Then I thought there's one thing that really would shake me, and I hope all of you, if we discovered that England really wasn't an island, but was in some obscure way joined onto Norway, and we were all really Scandinavians. Now, that I think would be interesting.
Things that are taken away are sometimes restored. When I was a little boy at school, I took it as absolutely axiomatic that the moon came out of the Pacific Ocean. And when later in life I announced this to men as being one of the most splendid axioms science had to show, all they did was fall about in open mirth. But now, just the other day, there's a new theory being trawled. Guess what? You're right. The moon might well have come from the Pacific Ocean. So they take away and they give again.
Going back to childhood and the Everest story, it must affect children rather more than us, I would think, because it's children who like to work much more in extremes, to have known boundaries to the world, which, after all, they haven't had an opportunity personally to test yet. I can recall... the delight of fairgrounds was always that you were promised the smallest, or that someone had written the Bible on a postage stamp and you can go and see it. And I can remember when I was 5 years old and going to the fair, and there was a notice outside a booth which simply said, "The biggest rat on earth," and persuading my father to take me in to see the biggest rat on earth. And you went through corridors and through tent flaps, and you eventually arrived at a small room where there was a well-illuminated photograph of Hitler. And I can remember being taken out by my father, and I still remember that as a denial of the opportunity to come in touch with the extreme, and the Knickerbocker glories, and the desperate Dan cow pies, and the longest words, the ultra-anti-disestablishmentarianism, and my father still going around saying, "Constantinople is a very long word, can you spell it?" So that the idea of extremes and size, the biggest and the smallest, which is now, I suppose, played up to in the Guinness Book of Records.
It's not childish, because, in fact, there are a lot of things which only have any validity because they are an extreme. I got on everybody's nerves in China at the Queen's tour by pointing out that well, I do.
You weren't the only one in the papers.
Every time the Frank Boffs and people stood on the Great Wall and said, "And this is the only man-made object which can be seen from the moon." And I'd say, well, no, actually it isn't. It can't be seen from the moon. From outer space, yes, but so can the Suez Canal and all the rest of it. Nobody wanted to know, because the point that was important about the Great Wall of China is that it had achieved a record. It nothing to do with it was a marvellous construction of the Qin dynasty or anything like that. It had become a record. And somehow, if you were standing there with something that had achieved a record, somehow you had partaken in its importance.
That goes with the moon coming from the Pacific Ocean. Another thing that was handed out like 1 and 1 equals 2 is you could never hit the moon with a rocket because it was moving. Not only was it moving, you were moving as well. And I thought, right, that opens and shuts it for me. And ever since, well, of course, we all believed that moon landing caper was actually done down at Elstree or in someone's
But I'm amazed that you quote 1 and 1 equals 2 as a sort of thing that we're from.
What?
If you actually went to school now, you'd find that 1 and 1 doesn't necessarily equal 2.
Well, that's
if
why
you
they
put
can't...
1 ice cream with 1 ice cream, you don't get 2 ice creams. You get 1 bigger ice cream. I think this is the problem. It's what Laurie was talking about.
But I'm not surprised that Bob is particularly concerned about the destruction of these various certainties, because, of course, you were a person who opposed, as I remember, the ending of the threepenny bit and the introduction of any sort of decimalisation at all, because
Listen,
you felt
you got that slightly wrong. It was the plucky tanner that I was digging about.
But this is the other point about...
And it was you foreign, you continental swine, who wanted kilometres and such.
There's a lovely little story that's told to Maupassant, who was always used to have his lunch in the Eiffel Tower, and somebody said to him, "Why do you have your lunch every day in the Eiffel Tower?" He says, "The only place in Paris you can't see it." Now, that's the point about the Eiffel Tower, that it stands there.
I don't believe Maupassant said that at all.
Yes, no, he did. He said no.
He called Albert Gristle.
No. He sat there.
He was on a day
trip.
But
that is the point, that it stands there, that these markers sticking above the world, rather like sort of Crystal Palace Tower, rather like Blackpool Tower, rather like the Eiffel Tower, rather like Everest, rather like the Empire State Building, which is still, to me, the tallest building in the world, despite the fact that there's a Sears Roebuck Tower block and the Trade Centre Tower block. It's the only thing that's really a building.
The only way of testing the endurance of these certainties, I think, is to examine your own behaviour, because I will admit that I will put my hand on something wood if I've let slip an aspiration.
Well, you're Irish, like me.
I will. I mean, in the spirit of Niels Bohr, the physicist who had the horseshoe over his study door, and he used to say to visitors, "I believe it makes you lucky, even if you don't believe in it." I think there's a state that a lot of us happily drift into.
Well, I still believe that A.L. Rouse wrote Shakespeare, but enough of that, because I want to. There's another thing I want to put to you. You remember during the week Healy was poo-pooing Callaghan on the grounds of his being old. Bit rich when you think Healy can remember Agincourt. Anyway, wasn't so much old that set me off, it was the other aspect of it. Too old, too old to eat tinned peaches, or Tim Peaches, that other figure. Too old to suck an iced lolly in the street, too old to chew gum. I was on the train this week buying a couple of sandwiches, a lot of prestidigitation with pound coins, a couple of fivers. When I got back to the carriage with the grub, I realised the bar lady had charged me £2 too much, entirely by accident. I sat fuming because I knew I couldn't go and ask her for it, knowing as soon as I opened my mouth, everyone in the queue would stare at me, and the minute they did, I'd blush. And I'm too old to blush. What are you too old for?
I'm too old. I've always been too old to go on things because I was always too tall. You've got a very modest stature. You're lucky. You must
have very
when you were
middle height.
I would suspect that when you were 7,
Especially
you
when I
looked
had my
around
hair.
about as though you were right for 7. But when I was 7, I looked 13 and wasn't allowed on the swings. In fact, I was never allowed on the swings because I was always too tall for them. So if height is added to age, then you're in real difficulty.
Yes.
One problem that you chaps don't have is when are you too old or too young to have your ears pierced? When I was about...
Who says chaps don't have that problem?
Well,
Good
not
heavens.
chaps who are... You're all too old, definitely.
You've got to be too silly to have your ears pierced.
No, at 13, I wanted to have my ears pierced, and I was told that there was no question about it. I would be too young until I was 17. And at 17, somehow or other, it was going to be quite moral and nothing out of the ordinary to have your ears pierced. So I waited until 17, but by that time I forgot about having my ears pierced. And I reached the age of 38, and I went and had my ears pierced. And all sorts of people said to me, "But you're 38. A strange age to have your ears pierced," as if I was an old age pensioner just announced that she was
Whose
going
ears
hang
might
gliding.
crumble.
No, so obviously ear piercing it can only take place between the ages of 17 and, say, 23. Otherwise, there's something a bit peculiar
Yeah.
about it.
I don't like this sort of classification. I remember the feelings of...
You're going to have your ears pierced.
No, the exclusion and the whole rejection I felt as a pubescent boy when lovely ladies used to sing a song that went, they're either too young or too old. They're either too grey or too grassy green. I've looked the field over, and lo and behold, they're either too young or too old. And I've never actually hit what she was after all through my life. I mean, it bears out the Orwell saying, I think, that viewed from within, all lives are a succession of failures. And I think if you start wondering whether you're too old or too young, you end up permanently excluded from that song. So I prefer to think in terms of what I can actually do and what I can't do.
I think you should make us a distinction between the sort of ice lolly thing. You're too old to have an ice lolly in the street. That seems to me the eternal cry of people who are out to spoil your fun. And you can even say to a child of 3, "You're nearly 3, you can't do that." And that's the eternal voice of the spoil sport. Now, there's another thing, purely physical things. And I'm happy to announce to anybody here that I'm too old now to help move pianos down the stairs. And that seems to me actually quite realistic. That although you might stay fairly young in spirit, there's actually no denying that your body actually ages and gets a little bit weaker. And if you're one of these sort of good old Fred types who go on turning out playing rugger every Saturday, embarrassing everybody, but you just won't go and you won't take the hint, then I think you're actually being unrealistic.
What about being too old to cry? I don't feel that I am. I mean,
Never too old to cry.
No, I'm not saying that, I burst out into bawling, racking sobs in the Reform Club or anything like that. But, when appropriately a tear starts, as they say, unbidden to the eye, it seems to me really about okay. I think the thing is, when people think that it's wrong, I mean, it's a sign of babyhood and childishness and so forth to cry, but that's only if you bang your knee. I think you can go on crying as old as you are, so long as you cry discriminatingly, don't you think?
Well,
Yes.
Winston Churchill used to sob almost after
Yeah,
every
but he's a
major
big,
speech.
grand, famous person.
Yes.
I mean, talking
Yes,
about
the
all
famous
the-
are allowed all sorts of
What
things
you don't
that we
want
aren't.
to know is what you don't want to know is what it is that you're supposed to do at particular ages.
Yeah.
I mean, that really it was only in the 19th century that people began. And psychologists have a lot to answer for here. They began to develop all these graphs and all these accounts of what babies could do at 1-year-old and 2-year-old and 3-year-old, and then you get people like Gail Sheehy writing that book Passages. Do you remember that came out a couple of years ago, which attempted to take it right through to, it said predictable crises of adult life. So what you should do at 40, how you should be feeling at 50, what your sensibilities were like at 60. And I can remember that prompted me. Someone rang up around about that time and said...
What, around about you were 40?
No, around about that, and said, listen, they said, we're doing something on midlife crisis, They said, what have you got to say about it? And I said, well, I'm not quite... They said,
Not there yet.
I'm not certain whether and they said, well, but haven't you felt sort of like lonely and that your work's no point? point or anything. I said, oh, yes, I felt that. I said, yes, all the time. And they said, well, so perhaps you'd like to... And I wrote something, and ever since then I've been worried that I'm going to become extraordinarily miserable and realise that I'm now having the midlife crisis that I've already written about.
I think we should recognise the milestones, but they shouldn't actually have any ages written on them. I can remember a woman telling me that she knew that she'd reached a milestone when she wore her glasses in public, and that the age was determined when curiosity overcame vanity. And I can remember when I was a very new doctor, the very first job I did, a woman collapsed, and I was standing by the bed with her husband, and she was out cold, waiting for the ambulance to arrive, and I made the sort of stupid remark that young doctors make to cheer him up, and said, well, age is on her side, you know. And her husband said to me, but she is 43, doctor. And from the bed, from this moribund hulk on the bed, came two words, 42.
Well, I really must defend...
One of the best... definitions, I think, of certain passages is somebody who said, you're middle-aged when the phone rings on a Saturday night and you hope it's not you.
Yes.
And it's absolutely true.
What we have forgotten is a wonderful excoriating colloquy, one of the best in English letters, on the eve of Mrs. Leo Hunter's... You're looking blank. No. Mrs. Leo Hunter's ball, fancy dress, and Mr. Tupman says he's going as a bandit. And I have to quote, I shall go as a bandit, repeated Mr. Tupman mildly. You don't mean to say, said Mr. Pickwick, gazing with solemn sternness at his friend, you don't mean to say, Mr. Tupman, that it is your intention to put yourself into a green velvet jacket with a 2-inch tail? Such is my intention, sir, replied Mr. Tupman warmly. And why not, sir? Because, sir, said Mr. Pickwick, considerably excited, because you are too old, sir. Too old, exclaimed Mr. Tupman. And if further ground of objection be wanting, continued Mr. Pickwick, you are too fat, sir. Sir, said Mr. Tupman, you're a feather. Sir, said Mr. Pickwick, you're another. Now we're going to have a song. And it's a jolly good one. Guess what it's called? You're absolutely right. He was too old to do what he did.
On Grandfather's 99th birthday, although he looked wizened and frail, he slid down the banister rail to open his gifts and his mail, then strapped on his First World War leg and cooked his soft-boiled birthday egg. In 99 years he had fought in 2 wars, he had hunted for tigers and suffered from yaws. He'd crossed the Antarctic in search of white seals and had hundreds and hundreds of meals on wheels on Grandfather's 99th birthday. The district nurse blushed a deep red as he grappled with her on the bed, and she took up her bedpan and fled. She was quite new to the scene. His usual nurse knew the routine. In 99 years he had sailed the high seas, had visited Mecca and bred honeybees. He'd once been a roue at coming out balls, and most district nurses enjoyed making calls on Grandfather's 99th birthday. He stuck a cigar in his lips and put on his bicycle clips and rode off to buy fish and chips to celebrate being 99 with a bottle of best vintage wine. In 99 years he had lost his left leg, enjoyed gourmet menus and drunk the odd keg. He'd smoked all his life through the cough and the wheeze, and outlived his wife and 4 healthy GPs on Grandfather's 99th birthday. Having finished his chips and fried cod, he thought it was time to meet God, and died with a sigh and a nod. They carved on his coffin's oak lid, he was too old to do what he did.
You know, while that song was going on, lads, Anne said they're too old to whistle. Oh, dear. That was your point, they're nodding. Yes, of course it was. Well, a man in close touch tells me that jogging is out and walking is in. I can see this is going to cause confusion. You knew when a man was jogging rather than just hurrying along the pavement because he got into a special costume for it. Will the new walkers wear +4s to distinguish them from the rest of us who are just looking for taxis? Successful walking calls for a lot of hard work before you even begin, because it's such a formless activity. You have to impose form on it. Where to? How long? Roads or fields? Will it rain? And above all, how soon can we turn round and come back? Well, I'm so overwhelmed in the planning stage, I often don't go. But these are questions I reckon the true walker never asks. I think he craves the formlessness. I think where wimps like me only ever find they're lost, the real walker actually is trying to lose himself in a subtler way.
You've no need to
I
worry.
leave it open to you.
You've no need to worry at all, because I don't think that walking can be turned into anything else. It can be turned into a healthy exercise without needing another name for it. You see, walking is like sitting down and standing up. It is one of the functions of the body, and anybody who attempts to turn it into something else, if you watch Olympic running, or walking rather, if you watch the way in which those peculiar, that puppetry, the way in which parts of the body which have never moved before, the way in which the shoulders go up and down in that particular way, proves that it's impossible to walk with complete sense of purpose. And if people go walking across the countryside, then what they're really doing with their bags on their back, bent over in their maps, is that they are marching. And those words should be used, so that really walking cannot be turned into a healthy activity.
I knew it was an interesting
its essential feature is that you can do other things while you are walking.
But when Bob described this formless activity of the individual losing himself, he's describing my main recreation. I think the attraction of walking is its formlessness to me, and I walk a lot. It's a very pleasurable, and it's a moral way to get about.
Let's put the cards on the table. Where you only walk in Weybridge to the post?
No, I don't. I walk for miles in the hills, the Surrey Hills, nearly.
The Surrey what?
In the Surrey Hills.
Surrey.
If you say so.
The thing about walking, in the way that those of us who actually just walk and look at things walk, is that it is so pleasurable that it will never catch on, luckily, with these exercise things, because it's too enjoyable. They will never believe that it's doing them any good.
No, I think that, in fact, walkers are divided into two groups, and it comes with...
three.
Well, no, I think actually two basic groups.
Well, let's hear what they are.
One are the dawdlers, the contemplative walkers, and they are created in the genes, because every mother knows that she's got children who are either dawdlers or purposeful walkers.
My mother used to say, you're philandering.
Yes.
When I walk slowly.
Exactly. So there's always a child who doesn't regard the walk as anything but a walk where he enjoys himself and he contemplates. And there's another child who regards every walk as a challenge. How many railings can I count? How many cracks can I avoid? And I think that goes throughout life. And I actually define them as Zen walkers and purposeful walkers, and that's simply because I've just come back from Japan, and there's a Zen garden.
They don't walk, do they? They have rickshaws.
No, but I'm using this as an image. There is a famous
or give each other piggybacks.
There's a famous Zen garden near Kyoto, which consists of nothing but a lot of stones and gravel. Now, I went there with somebody who was, no, you're only supposed to look at it, who was what I call a Zen walker, in the sense that he thinks that just contemplating things is enough. And he could stand for hours in front of this boring Zen garden, whereas I, who am a purposeful walker, I can't bear to walk unless it's for some reason like going to the post, kept saying, can we go now? Because I just don't feel that a walk which doesn't mean...
Walking.
What?
I mean, if you're stopped, you aren't walking, but are you?
No, but I mean, it's an attitude of mind, which is, I actually thought that as my husband is a Zen walker, he thinks walking is a contemplative act, and I'm a purposeful walker. I thought the only way to get round this problem between us, both of us, was for me to get a pedometer, so I could tie this little thing round my ankle and feel I'd achieved something.
I would like to return to this business of real walkers losing themselves, because Michael latched onto that. I just want to quote to you. I mean, I can't quote chapter and verse, but refer you to, and perhaps you know it already. It's essays probably by both, but certainly by either Hazlitt and Stevenson, and one or other of them said you have to sort of put yourself to it for the first 5 or 6 hours, and then a sort of numbness comes over you, a sort of anaesthesia, in which you are lost and you can walk through all the night. Now, I can't understand why this kind of nirvana should be attractive.
Can I?
Well, I'll just wait and see which of you shouts down the other.
I've got to disagree with Michael.
You will in a minute, when you said something.
I want to pick up what Bob said, and because
that's how to get the chairman's ear.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah,
When Anne said there were 2 sorts of walker, I objected fiercely and said there were 3, because there is a third sort of walker, I think. And it is a walk that has a contemplative element to it, but people move fairly quickly. And I actually believe that it is the regular beat of the feet on the ground that sort of not only shakes the thoughts into place, but there are good physiological reasons why this regular, routine physical exercise actually clears the channels in the brain. And like joggers, it eventually produces the state that Hazlitt, or was it Stevenson, does describe.
Probably.
It can actually happen through walking. And that's why... The great advantage of walking over jogging is you can stop walking and you can look and you can see what's going on. And it's an honourable way of taking exercise. A jogger who drops dead is a figure of fun.
Well,
a walker who drops dead while walking is making an honourable
Before
exit.
Nicholas bursts in, just want to say there's a 4th type of walker, the man who gets on the bus to finish it. And that's me. But anyway, Nicholas.
Just as everything Michael says about walking is right, except that he makes this extraordinary comment that it's so good that no one actually has tumbled to it. Now, the Ramblers Association, which represents walkers, is growing every year. I think probably more people walk
Is it the same
every
as
Saturday
walking,
than...
Nicholas?
They're more and more difficult
very
to
much
keep away from.
Just think of the word Rambler. Now, it just so happens that Lewes, where I live, is on a long-distance footpath called the South Down Way. I can assure Michael, every year, more and more people trudge through Lewes. Now, the strange thing is,
the word.
where I would agree with Hazlitt or Stevenson, is that they do lose themselves in it. And the thing that I always find slightly strange is that the more they enjoy it, the weirder they look. When these walkers tramp past, they don't glow with health, Michael. They've got broken veins. They've got red noses. They wear horrible hats and thick woolly socks. And in a way, it's a
Are you
triumph.
saying they shouldn't be doing it?
Oh,
then?
I'm saying they absolutely should be doing it. But walking is something where you feel good, but you look dreadful.
I can vouch for the fact that certainly people do walk and trudge through Lewes, because they very rarely stop there. But I would say that it seems to me that the art of walking is to be found in the middle of towns, and not when you... this is the very first time I've heard Michael O'Donnell went walking in the Surrey Hills. I still don't believe him. I think he invented it for the sake of the conversation. And afterwards, we'll check out and ask him to name 6 major cairns.
He's going to tell us
the
they're full
Surrey
of
Hills.
humours
But
next.
I believe that the art of walking really is in the town, where, for example, those people who are sophisticated town walkers know that whichever street they're in, there's a slightly different pace that has got to be adopted. That as you move out of St Martin's Lane into Charing Cross Road, you move slightly more quickly. As you move towards Oxford Street, the pace increases. Watching for other pedestrians coming towards you, the slight look up, the acknowledgement that they're going to go to the right and you're going to go to the left.
You've got to be trained to a hair for this sort of stuff.
Occasionally when you want to walk a little faster, then you move into the fast traffic just down by the curb, backwards and forwards. Thousands of people managing to produce this complicated pedestrian crossword which counts as working. Well, now, in the country, and these walks that you're being described, that trudge through, so much of the time it's crocodile file. You are walking behind someone else's bottom, and you actually stare. You can become fixated. I should imagine rather like a tandem rider upon someone's posterior, upon that
Even
back
so,
thing.
it won't quite wash. You see, what you've been describing in the town is going for a walk. Now, that's something, as you know, that happens on Sunday when everyone is, as it were, spiritually poverty-stricken. You can't think of anything better to do. Walking in the town is going for a walk. Walking, however, described by the other two, that's real walking.
We haven't talked about the professional walk, the art form. Walk as an art form, and that's the presenter's walk. As you know, this is a very curious construct, because it doesn't bear any relationship to real walking, because the person walks towards the people he is addressing, or the person he is addressing, and he suddenly does funny things with his hands, because he's very nervous that otherwise they'll look like boiled hams hanging off hooks in his jacket. So he walks towards you, talking, and then suddenly flailing his arms. Now,
And have you noticed the way when they get up to the camera, you feel they're going to try and borrow money off you?
Absolutely. Now, you see, this doesn't bear any relationship to any real walk, because, obviously, if you were talking to somebody on a walk, and if you were using the presenter's walk, the person you're talking to would be having to sprint very fast backwards,
Yes,
or
yes.
else you'd run over him. However, I think that the presenter's walk has actually affected quite a lot of people. Because have you noticed when people come in to, say, a wedding reception or a party, they suddenly start acting like a presenter's walk. They start doing funny things with their hands and addressing people as if you should start walking backwards.
But that's why
This isn't walking, Anne. You see, really, it's
an art,
permissible.
but it's
a
just
gate. G-A-I-T.
But it's important, Bob.
And that's
Bob, it's
rather different.
important because it draws attention to the fact that as soon as you attempt to reproduce the walk, to do a natural walk, I can remember at drama school for a year being invited to simply walk across the stage. We said, walk across as a middle-aged man, walk across as a young man, walk across. Now, that was the most difficult exercise that we could do, just simply managing to simulate something which, as I say, is as natural to most people, whether or not their feet are splayed, whether their knees are bent,
We
however
haven't
long their
spoken of
stride
walk-
are.
We,
Well,
it
I-
isn't-
I-
it
I
we
thought-
haven't spoken of walking the dog, have we? I mean, happily,
No,
my
no, well, I
family...
don't think that counts.
Well, you have
No,
to
no,
say that
that's
after I
a dog-
finish. You'll have a much
Chairman's
better chance
prerogative,
That's
it
a dog
does
walking
count.
use.
of telling me that it doesn't matter. I'll say it, though. I'll cross it,
Yeah.
Nicholas, though it blast me. Yes, it's taken care in my family, Nicholas, walking the dog is,
The dog walks
by
you.
other members. You see,
Yeah.
because I remember my father, the first man I ever heard talking about a dog taking a man for a walk was my father. Early conditioning, prejudice. I think walking a dog is a mark of the humbled spirit. And who wants to take a dog for a walk? All it does is smell things and look. The things that it can do, like sitting patiently outside a shop while you go in and get a paper, aren't really things you'd be too pleased to be able to do yourself.
No, but as
Your
Michael,
turn.
as
Now let me
Michael-
hear you respond
as,
to that.
As Michael has said,
That's it.
we actually feel better for going for walks, and that I think makes you think about the walk as a form of escape. That you can go outside
Walk.
the house and you can go for a walk, and you go from A to B, and you somehow think you've achieved something. Of course you haven't. And I wonder how you respond to this story. G.M. Trevelyan, who I think was the first president
great
of the
walker.
Ramblers,
Great
a great walker. Now, on his honeymoon night, he saw
Oh,
his wife
draw it mild. I mean, take it easy.
into the place they're going to stay, and he said, I'll see you in a minute, and he went off to have a 22-mile walk. Now, I've never known whether that was a positive thing to do or a negative thing to do. Therefore, the only conclusion must be it's both.
Anne Leslie, Dr. Michael O'Donnell, Nicholas Tucker and Professor Laurie Taylor were stopping the week with Robert Robinson. Instant Sunshine provided the musical interlude, and the programme was produced by Pippa Burston.